Sean, do you? Perfect. Hello, my name is Daniel Barkowitz, and it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight to our National Advisor training. Thank you all so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed the music as we got started, just something to get you in the mood and to get ready to really dive in and talk about how important the FAFSA is and what's going on this year and helping you to help us, to help our students nationally to complete the FAFSA and to make a difference. So I want to welcome all of you here. I am curious if you wouldn't mind if you would open up the chat box and just type in the chat, where are you dialing in from tonight? What city or state are you dialing in from? Just so we have a sense of who's in the room, that would be great. And thank you for participating in that. A lot of Florida people, which I see. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being with us. Someone from Connecticut, from Vermont, from Orlando. I'm actually from Florida as well. I'm dialing in today actually from Orlando, although I work at the University of Miami. I'm actually sitting in Orlando today as well. And let me introduce myself. Again, my name is Daniel Barkowitz, and I am the Assistant Vice President for Financial Assistance and for Student Employment at the University of Miami. It's a role that I've been in for 2 years. Although I have about 35 years of financial aid experience, I've worked at a lot of different kinds of institutions. And welcome to the person who used to work in the UM financial aid office. Um, I've worked at public institutions, open access institutions. I was assistant vice president of financial aid at Valencia College in Orlando. I've worked at very highly selective institutions, four-year privates. I was director of financial aid at MIT in Cambridge. I was in charge as dean of financial aid at Columbia University for the undergraduate program and the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences and Engineering. So I've spent about 35 years working in institutions of higher education of really all types. And tonight, I'm not representing University of Miami. Tonight, I'm representing the field, the financial aid profession, and really giving you some detailed information about the FAFSA and inviting you to be a part of a solution to a problem that we've seen that's emerged this year. I want to recognize as we get started our partners and my partner, particularly with Bridge to Life and Broward Education Foundation, who have really been a great partner in reaching out nationwide to try to make a difference. We also want to recognize the Department of Education and ECMC, who's actually funding our efforts to do this work. So this is actually being funded by a grant from the federal government through ECMC to really reach out to all of you to help us solve this FAFSA problem. So my goal tonight, and it's now 6:05 Eastern. I want to let you know we're going to be together. I know we've booked for 2 hours. It will not be 2 hours. It'll be probably about an hour and 10 minutes or so. I imagine we'll be done by about 7:15 Eastern time. We'll leave plenty of time for questions, and we'll stay until your questions are answered. We have lots of time. If you have questions you want to get answered, we're happy to provide them for you. I also want to acknowledge up front there are a number of people on the back end who will be answering your questions. So as we go through tonight, please reserve the chat for any messages that I ask that you put in there or any feedback you want to offer us. But the Q&A is really where your questions belong. And we'll be monitoring the Q&A throughout the evening tonight. And we will be updating the Q&A with answers to your questions as we go along. We have other financial aid officers who are ready to assist and answer questions for you as we go. In addition, I want to make you comfortable and let you know that we are recording this session. So what that means is we will send you a copy, a link to a recording of the session tonight. So you should feel free to sit back and participate and watch. If you want to take notes, you're welcome to, but don't feel like you have to write everything down because you will get a copy of this presentation for you later if you want to refer back to a particular section. In addition, we will give you a link to the website that has a copy of the PowerPoint presentation I'm going to use tonight, the second PowerPoint, which you'll see the walkthrough of the FAFSA. So once again, don't feel like you have to take screenshots or anything like that. We will get you covered and comfortable as we go along. So with that, what I'd like to do is to get started and talk a little bit about sort of what our agenda is as we get started. So number one, we're going to talk about why FAFSA completion is important. What is the FAFSA? What does it get you? Why is it important? We're going to tell you a little bit about the FAFSA fiasco of 2024, what's happened this year, and why there's this desperate call for help. We're going to talk about why it isn't too late to help. Why now, even though we're at the beginning of July, it's still okay and it's still a good time to get involved and create some solutions. And we're going to invite you to be part of the solution. So that's our agenda for this evening before we actually walk through the FAFSA itself. So first of all, what is the FAFSA? The FAFSA is the national application. The acronym stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It is the single application that students are asked to participate in to complete to qualify for federal, state, many institutions financial aid, some scholarship providers financial aid, really financial aid in general, although all federal aid, but financial aid in general is accessed by using the FAFSA. It's a form that students complete each year that they plan on attending college. It's the same form that a 17-year-old whose first time in college is going off for the first time, they would complete the form. But it's also the same form that, a 30-something would complete if they were going back to grad school, or, maybe a 50-year-old would complete if they were going off to grad school or to finish their undergraduate degree. So it's the same application form that's used nationwide. Millions of people complete the FAFSA form every year. What we do know is that for seniors in high school, it is a marker of college likelihood. So seniors in high school who complete a FAFSA are much more likely to immediately enroll in college than those who don't, because the FAFSA again gets you access to financial aid. And you can see on the chart in front of you some reports on the 2021-22 year. It's the last year we have final statistics on, but about $177 billion was given out to undergraduates who were attending undergraduate institutions in financial aid in the 21-22 year. And there are a couple of things I want to draw your attention to that will hopefully dispel some of the myths that people have about financial aid. One is, well, the only reason to do a FAFSA is to qualify for a loan. And I want to say that is a myth, right? If you look, you'll see that the vast majority of money that's available from the FAFSA application process and in the system is actually grants and scholarships. About 60% of the funding available is in the form of grants and scholarships. It is true that about a third of the funds are available in the form of loans, and that includes student and parent loans. And you'll see there's also money available in tax benefits and work awards. So the first thing I want to say is that, again, the myth of that only loans are available, that is a myth. The grant is absolutely part of this process. Number two, I want to say the other myth I often hear is I earn too much money. I won't qualify. Why should I apply? Many families assume they won't qualify for the federal Pell Grant, which is one part of the application of grant programs, but there are lots of other grant programs that families may qualify for. And the only way to know if you will qualify is to apply. So, we have students at the University of Miami, for example, who earn well in the six-figure incomes who qualify for grant funding from the university. And the only way they would get access is by completing the application process. So really important, again, as you think about applying for financial aid, or you work with families who are, that you remind them of those pieces. The other piece I will say is if you look at the largest piece of this pie, it is actually institutional grants. It's grants provided by colleges and universities that make up about a third of all the money available every year. And so institutions put a lot of money in to helping reduce the costs for students who can't afford their application or their attendance in college. The other thing I'll highlight for you is that in a typical year, and this year truly has been anything but typical, but in a typical year, the application cycle for the FAFSA would open on October 1st of the student's senior year in high school. And on that October 1st or shortly after, they would complete a FAFSA and they would start the application process from there. Some students only complete a FAFSA. Some institutions ask for other financial aid applications as well. There's an application called the CSS Financial Aid Profile. There's also some institutions that have their own either scholarship form or other form they might require. So it's possible the student might do more than one financial aid application. For those of you in Florida, Florida has a Florida financial aid application as well for students to complete their senior year of high school to get access to all the different Florida state scholarship programs that are available. And your state, if you're not in Florida, may have a similar application as well. So in a typical year, you would get all that done probably in October or November of the student's senior year in high school, if they're a traditionally aged undergraduate. And then the admissions office and aid office would prepare their admitted notices, their aid offers, and they would send them out with plenty of time for a student to make a decision. That is a typical year. As I've said before, this was anything but a typical year. In 2024, we've had what I think is probably best phrased as a FAFSA fiasco. And I want to define for you sort of why it's been so bad and give you a flavor of that, so you understand why there's been some resistance and reluctance to get FAFSAs completed this year. So first of all, the reason that we've had to go through all of this change is because there were two laws that were passed by the federal government with good intent, and they will ultimately be good things. But those laws are the FAFSA Simplification Act of 2020 and the Future Act of 2019. Those two laws, passed by Congress, required reprogramming and rebuilding of the entire FAFSA system from the ground level up. So literally throwing away all the old computer programming and going back and rewriting everything from soup to nuts. And as part of that process, right, the Department of Education reached out to Congress and said, well, you told us you wanted it live for the 23-24 students attending in 23-24 that academic year. We don't think we're going to be able to get this done in time. Can we have a year longer? And the Department of Education requested, and Congress gave them, a 1-year extension. So this year's senior class in high school, the ones that just graduated, or the upcoming class coming into college in 24-25, were the first group to be part of this new FAFSA. And here are just some of the issues that they experienced this year. Number one, the launch date of FAFSA was delayed. Remember, I said typically it goes live on October 1st. This year, the FAFSA form didn't go live until December 30th. And I say sort of because it was live for about 30 minutes on December 30th. It was live for about an hour on December 31st. And it wasn't until the first couple of weeks of January that the FAFSA form was really available for families to complete. Once you complete a FAFSA, in typical years, we at the college would get that information immediately. But this year, no. Data wasn't shared with colleges and universities until mid-March. And once we start getting the data, we noticed that the data were wrong. So there were problems with the information transferred from the IRS. There were errors in their behind-the-scenes setup and formula. There were some badly written questions. I'll highlight those for you tonight, pitfalls to watch out for. There were problems for families where the student was a US citizen, but the parent wasn't, and other issues you can see, student corrections in school corrections, that have really derailed the process this year for many of our students and families. And what it's meant is that nationwide, we are in a deficit situation in terms of FAFSAs completed. So normally, by this time of the year, over half of the graduating senior class from high school would have completed a FAFSA. This year, and that's the orange line, that was last year's class and the numbers of students who had completed. This year, it's only 44.7%. So it's been, if you will, a 12% reduction. I know this math is odd. If you take 52 and minus 44, you get 8, but they're talking about the percent of loss of that total number. So 12% reduction. Now that's better than we were. We were at a 40% reduction back as in the middle of March. So we're making progress, but we're still behind. And I know many of you are from Florida tonight. If you're not from Florida, I saw Connecticut. Connecticut is actually doing fairly well. These data come from the National College Attainment Network, from their FAFSA tracker. Connecticut is one of the top states in the country in terms of numbers of high school seniors completing, but it's still only at 51.4%. But if you look at Florida, we are way down on the list of the 50 states, actually 52 because they count Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. We're only at 32% of our high school seniors who've completed a FAFSA at this point. And you can see This is not something to be proud of. We're 42nd in terms of reduction from this year over last year. So that is the problem, right? That's where things sit at the moment. So what's the solution? So let's turn to the solution. The solution is number one, it's not too late to apply for fall financial aid. Many families might have written it off, might have thought, you know what, I'm not just not going to bother. It's too late. It is not. So the applications are still open. It is still time to apply for financial aid to have an impact for the fall semester. We are nearly running out of time, but it is not too late at the moment. It's also not too late to apply for fall admission, especially at our state colleges and community colleges. As you know, in Florida and around the country, we have a fantastic education system with open access institutions, many of them around the state. In the state of Florida, there are 28 state colleges that offer bachelor's as well as associate's degrees, and it is not too late to apply for admission to those institutions. They are still looking for students for the fall. So even if a student has said, it's just not worth it, I'm not going to get my stuff done in time, it is not too late to apply for admission, and they have open access. So all you have to do is complete an application, have graduated from high school, and you're admitted to those institutions. Now, maybe you have a student who's already written off the fall and said, I'm going to take a job, I'm going to do something different for the fall. It's not too late to apply for spring admission. Many colleges offer a spring admission program, and you still have to do the FAFSA for funding for that program. It's the same FAFSA. So now is also a good time to get the application done if you're thinking about, or you have a student who's thinking about spring admission. And even if the student's already enrolled, but just decided it's too much trouble, I'm not going to bother, it isn't too late to complete the FAFSA now. The FAFSA can still be completed for fall enrollment if the student has committed to fall. So tonight, you're here to become a trained FAFSA advisor. And tonight, what we'll show you in just a moment, we're going to go through the actual application question by question, and I'll show you some things to watch out for, some pitfalls in the application. But just to define the benefit that we're offering, and again, I'll be able to offer this in partnership with our federal colleagues, funded really by the federal government. What we're offering is if you can find 10 students, they can be high school graduates who are just starting, they can be returning college students, they can be graduate students, it doesn't matter. But 10 individuals who have not yet done a FAFSA, if you can find those 10 individuals who are planning on attending college and help them complete a FAFSA and collect that documentation, we will pay $500 in a stipend for each group of 10 students that you're able to collect and work with. And so at the end of the presentation tonight, I'll go through how do you document that? How do you submit that information? But that is the offer that we're making. Tonight, you're here for one of our advisor trainings. As you can see on the schedule, there is one more on July 20th. So if you know someone else who might be interested, they are welcome to join us on that day. In addition, we're offering family sessions for individual students and families who might be interested in completing a FAFSA. And the benefit for a family member who attends one of our sessions is if they complete a FAFSA and provide documentation, we will give them a $20 Amazon gift card as well. So again, with support from the federal government to provide an incentive for families to get that FAFSA done. So if you have questions after tonight, and we'll repeat this at the end, you can feel free to email me at dbarkowitz@gmail.com. You can reach out to the project at fafsaeducate@gmail.com, or you can visit our website. We'll talk about that a little more as we go on. Okay, so with that in mind, what I would like to do then is I would like to begin with a little bit of a promotion there, I guess. Let me turn on the FAFSA presentation. So let's go through, we're going to go through and look at the FAFSA together. Carolina, if you can please repeat your question in the Q&A. I see it in the chat. But again, just a reminder, we're going to answer questions in the Q&A because other people might also have an interest in the same question you're asking. Okay, so this presentation, just to give you a heads up, this is a very long slideshow. There are 312 pages in this slide document. We are not going to look at every one of them, or else we'd be here for the next 7 hours. What I'm going to do is walk you through the most common way that a family would interact with FAFSA, and I'll show you that process. We'll step it through together. That said, this document will be available for you if you would like to download it and look at it, um, and be able to, look at it that way later. You are welcome to um, do that at your leisure at a later time. It will be available for you. I will point out where you can download it. But what I want to step through with you tonight is the information about how to complete the FAFSA. So a couple of things. Again, this is sample screenshots, so it's going to look very close to what a student will see, and it will show you the majority of questions that the student will see on their FAFSA form. What's important is when you get started, you need to, as a parent and as a student, create what's called an FSA ID, a Federal Student Aid ID. That ID is a combination of a username and a password, just like you would use to access your bank account or your credit card or your library account, whatever. You need a account ID and a password. That setup needs to happen 1 to 3 days before you do the FAFSA. The reason for that is because when you set up your FSA ID, the Department of Education is going to ask you to provide your date of birth and your social security number, and they're going to use that information to match against the national databases from the Social Security Administration, from the Department of Homeland Security to prove your identity. Once they've assigned your identity to your FSA ID, you can then use that FSA ID to access your records with the IRS so that all of your tax information will automatically transfer to the form, and it makes the process so much easier. So as a result, every student will need to create an FSA ID. They should do that again 1 to 3 days before going through the FAFSA process. They'll get an email confirming their FSA ID has been set up, and then they can start the FAFSA. As I've said, at least the student needs to do it. And for dependent students, and we'll define what that means in a moment, for dependent students, at least one parent needs to have an FSA ID as well. If a student is married, their spouse has to have an FSA ID. Now, some parents may have completed a FAFSA in the past, or they might have done one as a student, or some students might have. If they already have an FSA ID, it's the same ID. They don't have to create a new one. But again, at least the student needs to have one and at least one parent. The other big change in the FAFSA this year is that it is what's called a roles-based application. What that means is when you log in, you will identify I'm a student or I'm a parent, and the information presented to you will be presented to you for your role. Students won't see parent questions and parents won't see student questions. It's limited to the role you're playing in the application. That's a major change from before. Before, anyone logged in saw the whole thing and you could do it together. But now it requires each person to do a separate part of the application. Once everything's submitted, then the application will be processed and students will get a confirmation that they have finished the application process. There's also a new term this year, and it's a term I want to define. The term is contributor. And what do we mean by contributor? So normally we think of contributor as someone who's going to give money or give something of value, right? In the FAFSA term, what contributor means is someone who's providing information. It's not a requirement to provide money. It's really just about providing information. So everyone who provides information on the form is a contributor, and they have to sign the application electronically to confirm that they've given permission, and they have to provide consent to share their information. So we'll look at that again as we go through tonight and walk through the application process. So again, just gives you some more information about things that have changed. The piece I want to highlight here is that dependent students have to invite their parents. So the student sends an invitation to their parents, and that's how the parent gets access to the FAFSA. If you're an independent student, or if you're the parent of a dependent student, there may be situations where you have to invite your spouse to contribute. And I'll talk about those situations as we go on. And there is an ability to correct your application after the form is completed in case there was an error made or something needs to be changed. Okay, so let's walk through the process when a dependent student invites their parent. So basically, to log into FAFSA, you're going to log into studentaid.gov. It's just that web address, studentaid.gov. And when you go, there'll be a link for the FAFSA form. And if you're on this main page, you'll see the 24-25 FAFSA form, and a student will click on Start a New Form. That is how they begin the application. If they already have done a form, they would click on Access Existing Form, but we're assuming, again, we're starting with someone who's starting a brand new form. Once they click on that button, they'll be taken to a login, and the login is where they'll provide their FSA ID. So again, their FSA ID would be a combination of their username and password. So username and password is required. If you don't have an FSA ID yet, you can click on Create an Account, and that will take you to a process to create your FSA ID. Now, students who create an FSA ID have to have a a social security number to be able to create their FSA ID, because students have to be U.S. citizens or permanent residents, eligible non-citizens, to be able to actually create an FSA ID. But parents don't. And I'll talk through how a parent can create an FSA ID, even if they don't have a social security number, when we get to that section. But for right now, for students, right, you have to have a combination of a username and password that was provided through that FSA ID process. Once you log in, the student will then select I am a student. And we're going to play through this process as a student named Raya Tran. So Raya is our student. You can see it says, Welcome, Raya, to the FAFSA form. Raya clicks on I am a student. The next four screens are four short videos that are available for the student to walk through and learn a little bit about the application process. The first one talks about the FAFSA and what is the FAFSA. It gives you a quick video. The second talks about what information you might need and who your contributors are. It also tells you what documents might be needed as you walk through the form. And again, it identifies what it means to be a contributor. The third video tells you how long and what to expect as you go through the process. It says an hour. I will say it is not an hour. Admittedly, I have a lot of experience with financial aid. It took me about 7 minutes to complete my FAFSA. It may take a new student a little longer, but many, many families have come to me and said, I'm surprised at how fast it went. Did I miss something? So it actually is a very quick process if you move it through. And again, with the advice I'm giving you tonight, it should hopefully be a quick application process. And finally, the last page tells you what happens after you submit the form. What happens next? How does it get to the school? What's the school going to reach out to you and tell you? So again, those four videos are available for the student to review. By the way, those four videos will also be available for the parent to review. And tonight, as we go through this, I'm going to tell you page by page where the information is basically the same for students and parents. Right now, we're looking at this from a student's perspective. We'll later look at it from a parent's perspective, but you'll see that a lot of the pages are basically identical with the same information. So the very first page the student has in their student section verifies their identity. It repeats back to them all the information about what the department knows about who they are. So here's Raya's name, here's Raya's date of birth, her social security number, her email address, etc. And if there was an error, it tells her, whoop, let me back up, sorry. If there's an error, it tells her that she can access her account settings and fix whatever might be incorrect. So here's the very first question, and this is the one already that causes students some confusion and also parents some confusion. So let me answer what this means for students. So the first question says, what is your state of legal residence? So the idea here is, where is the student residing? And if it's Florida, then they would choose Florida. If it's Connecticut, Connecticut, etc. And the date the student became a legal resident of that state. Now, the reason this provides confusion is because a lot of students don't know when they became a legal resident, especially if they were born in the state. Well, the answer is, if you were born in the state, you became a legal resident the day you were born. So they would put the month and date of, or month and year of their date of birth. If they moved to the state, then you would put that information in here. So what are we really looking for here? The idea is that many state scholarships and also many in-state tuition programs require that you live in the state for a certain amount of time before you qualify for those programs. In the state of Florida, for example, it is 1 year before you start your education that you have to have resided in the state of Florida. So if you start your education in August of 2024, as long as you move to the state of Florida before August of 2023, you will qualify for in-state tuition, provided you provide documentation. But this question gets at that. So I wouldn't worry so much about sort of how long it's been. It's more, have you been here at least a year? Different states have different requirements. So if you have questions, you should ask the state scholarship provider. But basically, most of them are 3 years or less or more, right? Around at the maximum 3 years as their sort of target. When parents get to this question, parents are often confused, especially if they both have different dates that they moved into the state. Again, my advice in that situation is to pick the oldest date, but it doesn't much matter as long as both dates are at least 3 years or more old. It won't have much of a difference on the application, but pick the oldest date to be safe. The very next page that is provided is consent and approval. So consent and approval is necessary for us to go, when I say us, for the Department of Education to go and pull their tax record from the IRS. By providing consent, the student is authorizing the department to go retrieve any tax details they might have at the IRS, or also to check and see if they have any tax information at all. They may get back a response that says, no, the student didn't file taxes. But the department still needs consent to be able to go check that out. So what you'll see is the student must provide consent. What's important is if the student does not provide consent, they will not be considered eligible for federal aid or institutional aid for that matter. The same is true of any contributor. So if the student needs a parent to fill out the form with them and the parent doesn't provide consent, then the student is not eligible for federal or institutional or state financial aid. It's very important that consent be provided. So this walks through why consent's important. It asks you to approve that you've authorized consent. If Raya clicked decline, there would be a pop-up that would give her lots of warnings that says, you really don't want to do this because if you do, you won't be qualified for federal aid. But again, that is this process. This is here around consent and to make sure that Raya provides consent. We'll see a similar side when Raya's mom does her section of the form where Raya's mom needs to provide consent. So now we're going to step into the first section of Raya's application, and it's the section called Student Personal Circumstances. So you'll see as a signpost that the department has put up a little blue page that says we're going to walk through this. And on the next page, you'll see the 5 steps. So there are 5 different sections of the form that Raya is going to complete. So the very first question asks about marital status. So to talk about why we're asking the next set of questions, these set of questions are designed to help identify if a student is what's called dependent or independent. So what does that mean? So dependent means that a student is reliant upon parents and needs parental information on their application. So if a student is dependent, then at least one parent, possibly 2, will have to complete their section of the application. If a student is independent, then that means no parent information is needed, and it's just the student and potentially any spouse they might have who has to complete the application. Up to this point, every question we've seen has been the same if it were Raya as a 17 or 18-year-old filling out the application, or if it was me as a 50-something-year-old completing the app. That cough was on purpose, by the way. 50-something-year-old completing the application. We'd all see the same questions. So up to this point, and I'd answer this question, I am married, not separated. But Raya is going to answer, because she's the student, that she is single. If you answer married on this, that means you're independent. If you're single, you might be dependent. So each of these next screens is going to help figure out that information. The next question asks about what school level the student is enrolled in. And you'll see first year, second year, other undergraduate, or master's degree. If you're going for a master's degree, you're automatically independent. In other words, no parent information is required. But Raya is answering first year. Now, let me say a word about that. So a lot of our students have dual enrollment credits or maybe AP credits or maybe ACE credits. So they have some college credits by the time they get to full-time in college. What do they answer? The answer is they would answer first year. So if you've never been at college full-time before, you still will answer first year. The other tricky question, it shouldn't be, but it is a number of students, for whatever reason, believe that when they graduate high school, they've earned a bachelor's degree. That is not the case. A high school diploma is not a bachelor's degree. So be careful of the question on the bottom of the page where it says when they start their 24-25 school year, will they already have their first bachelor's degree? In most cases, that will be no. If a student has finished their bachelor's degree and is going back for a master's or going back for another bachelor's degree, they would answer yes. But what's important there is by answering yes, you've churned down several types of financial aid that are only available to undergraduates pursuing their first bachelor's. So again, most of the students you'll be working with, unless they're graduate students, are likely to answer no to that question. So again, we're still in this process of figuring out if um, if in fact the student is dependent or independent. So now we are to the next series of questions. So this series of questions called personal circumstances help identify if the student is independent. If the student can answer yes to any of these questions, they're considered independent. And I'll run through them pretty quickly. Is the student an active duty? So are they in the armed forces? Are they a veteran of the armed forces? Do they have children or dependents of their own for whom they provide more than half the support? Is the student an orphan? Is the student a ward of the court, in foster care, legally emancipated, or in legal guardianship with someone other than their parents? If any one of those is true, then the student is considered independent. Again, in Raya's case, she's answered none of these apply. So we're still not sure is she independent or dependent, but we would move on to the next page. The next page asks about homelessness. So at any time on or after July 1 of 2023, was the student unaccompanied, meaning they did not live with their parents, they weren't with their parents, and either homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? Raya has answered no, but let's talk about this for a second. So if you're working with a student who is living in a shelter or is couch surfing, but does not have their parents around, then you would answer, or they would answer, yes to this question. The very next screen would ask for clarification. Do you live in a shelter? Are you able to be certified by someone in the McKinney-Vento system? Do you need to talk to a financial aid officer to document your circumstances? So those questions will show up on the next page if Raya were to answer yes. In this case, she answered no. So what that means is we're going to go on. But again, just want to make sure you were aware that a homeless student is considered independent if they're homeless without their parents. If it's a homeless family, that's not considered independent automatically. So the very next page says, are there other special circumstances we should know about? So reminder, up to this point, we've answered questions that have a specific definition. You either are or are not an orphan. You either are or are not married. You either are or are not a graduate student. What we don't know is, are you in an unusual circumstance, right? Maybe you're a victim of human trafficking, or you left home because home was an abusive or neglectful or threatening environment. If any of these special circumstances, well, actually, it's called unusual circumstances are true, then the student would answer yes, and they would be considered what's called provisionally independent. And they would need to provide documentation to one of the colleges they're applying to help identify how they are provisionally or really independent. In Raya's case, she doesn't have any of these issues, so she's going to answer no. But if you're working with a student who's got one of these issues, who might be in an unusual circumstance, you would answer yes on this page, and no parent information would be required. So we're almost done with dependency status. I know we spent a lot of time here, but the very last question says, okay, up to this point, you are a dependent student. Raya, we figured it out. You're dependent. Are your parents going to do the form with you or not? So sometimes parents have a resistance to doing the FAFSA form. I think often because they think by completing the FAFSA form, they've somehow obligated themselves to making payment for college. And I would say that is not true. In fact, filling out the FAFSA form, all it does is determine whether or not someone is eligible for aid. It is not an issue of, will you or will you not have to pay for college? It's just, are you eligible for financial aid? But this page gives Raya an option. It says, basically, if your parents refuse to fill out the form, you can click yes here. And if you do, you will just get a very small, unsubsidized loan, a loan that you have to pay interest on while you're in school. So in most cases, the student's going to answer no. This is in a sense, a tricky question because if they answer yes, their parent information will be skipped, but they automatically will only get a small loan. And we really don't want that to happen, right? We want that to be a last option resort for families who have specific needs, or where a parent absolutely refuses to do the form. So in most situations, you're going to answer no, or the student will, on this page and move it along. Now, there is a question I want to answer live that I'm seeing on um, the Q&A, and that is, how do you determine dependent status for a homeless family, not a homeless student? If a family is homeless, then chances are they will be considered a dependent family. Dependent student will still require parent information, but they'll likely to have a very low or nil contribution, but we'll still need parents' information in that case. The homeless waiver only applies, again, when the student is unaccompanied and homeless. If the student has their parents with them, they'll be dependent, but that doesn't mean that there'll be a large contribution. It just means they still have to provide their parents' information. Okay, the very next section of the application asks, okay, well, tell me, who are your parents? So this is what's called the parent wizard. And there are really three questions that are asked on this page. You only see one of them here because Raya has a pretty typical or stereotypical family. But I'm going to tell you all three of the questions because I think it's important for you to understand them. So, as parents, which parent or parents have to answer the questions on the FAFSA? And there are three ways to determine that. The very first question is, are your parents married to each other? And by parent, on the FAFSA form, it means their biological or adoptive parent, their legal parent. So are your mom and dad, or mom and mom, or dad and dad, are they married to each other? If the answer is yes, then those are the parents you'll have to provide information for on the FAFSA form. But what if the answer is no? The very next question that will be asked then is, are your parents unmarried and living together? So let's say Raya's mom and dad had Raya, they still live together, but marriage is, an old custom, and they just decided, no, we're not going to get married. There's no need for us to get married. If that's the case, we'd still want information on both mom and dad because they are living together. They're in one household together. Both parents would still provide information. What if the answer to the question of, are your parents unmarried and living together, is no? So we have no on the first question, no on the second question. The third question would ask, or asks, the student to identify which parent, mom or dad, which parent, or mom, which parent provided more financial support over the last 12 months. And they leave that up to the student to define. So what they mean by financial support generally is who paid for your living expenses, who paid your allowance, who gave you food, who provided you shelter, which parent provided more support over the last 12 months financially. That is the parent with whom you will complete the FAFSA. Now, a couple things. Notice it doesn't ask, who do you live with, right? It might be the person you live with who provided more financial support, but it might not be. It also doesn't ask who claims you on your tax return. So it might be that parent who provides more financial support who claims you on your taxes, or again, it might not be. It doesn't ask that question. What it asks is who provides more financial support. So again, that's an important distinction that you want to take a look at. If the FAFSA says if neither parent provided more financial support, or if the financial support that was provided was equal, so the same amount of money, then the FAFSA says choose the parent who has more income and or more assets to be the one who fills out the form for you or with you. But that's the only time the FAFSA wants you to choose the one who makes more money. So once you've chosen the parent, so if you're a divorce separated situation, once you've chosen, again, in typical fashion, mom or dad, the question becomes mom or dad gives more. So let's say in this case it's mom. Then the question is mom remarried? If mom is remarried to a stepfather or stepmother, then that custodial family will be the family that fills out the form together. So we'll want information on mom and her new spouse, whoever that might be. So let me give you an example. So again, I'm Daniel. My wife is Rebecca. Rebecca and I have a child. Somewhere along the child's lifetime, we divorce. So the child lives with Rebecca, but I pay more of her expenses. So I am the parent of record for the FAFSA. I happen to be remarried to Colleen. Colleen is my new wife. So Colleen and I will provide information on the FAFSA because I provide more financial support and Colleen is married to me. So again, if you have particular questions, you should feel free to ask them in the Q&A, but that is how this process works for families with the FAFSA. So once you identify who the parent is, FAFSA asks the student to provide some information about that parent. Now, here's another tricky page. I just want to talk about this for a second. Most students will know the name of their parents, you would hope. Most students will maybe even know their parents' date of birth. I would imagine most students do not know their parents' social security number. In fact, probably most students don't even know their own social security number, right? It wasn't until I started applying to college as a 17, 18-year-old that I started learning my social security number only because I wrote it down on forms so many times. But this section, which remember, this is completed by the student, requires name, date of birth, and social security number for their parent. It's really important they get this right because if they don't, they will fail to match with the parent's information when they fill out their form. If the parent doesn't have an SSN, the student can click on the form that says, my parent doesn't have an SSN. And in that situation, they can enter the ITIN or the individual taxpayer ID number instead of the social security number. If the parent doesn't have an ITIN, doesn't have a social security number, the parent can still complete the form. They will be sent through an identity verification process using information from a credit bureau report, or last chance, they'll just be accepted as a valid person and they'll have to prove identity later through some kind of documentation. But again, really important that the information be provided accurately by the student. The other thing I'm going to mention, or at least highlight for you, is the name question. So again, where this becomes an issue is you don't want to use an acronym or a nickname or an initial. You want to use the legal name that is on the legal documentation. So especially for families who come from Hispanic heritage, if, for example, your last name is Romero Gonzalez, right? And your tax form says Romero Gonzalez and your social security card says Romero Gonzalez, you want to put that information as your full last name. If your social security card or passport says Romero, you don't want to put Romero Gonzalez because they'll fail to match. So again, you want to make sure that the information you enter for name matches whatever is on your legal documentation. That's true for the student. That's also true for the student's parents. So we've completed that section. Now it's time to move on to the student demographics section. So this section, the first couple of questions are really optional. They ask information about gender and about race and ethnicity. They don't need that information really to do for financial aid qualification, but it's asked just to provide basic research information. So you can choose prefer not to answer. The next question is very important, though, and that is the student's U.S. citizenship status. It is required that a student be either a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen to receive federal financial aid. What is considered an eligible non-citizen? So that includes, for example, people who have a green card or are considered a permanent resident. It might include people who are here under parolee or asylee circumstances, people here who are here under a violence against women authorization waiver or other situations. If you're not sure if you qualify or your student qualifies as an eligible non-citizen, the easiest way to determine that is to do a web search for the term eligible non-citizen in FAFSA, and you'll find in response a list of all the different qualifications that count for an eligible non-citizen. For example, a parolee from Haiti uh, through a certain period of time, a parolee from Ukraine from a certain period of time forward will qualify. But again, best option is to do a web search to check that information. Again, as a reminder, it doesn't matter if the student is, as long as the student's a U.S. citizen, their parents don't have to be. Their parents don't even have to reside in the U.S., right? Once the student is qualified, it doesn't matter what their parent status is. So let's say I was, traveling to the U.S., I'm a foreign national, we were living here for a year as students, and my wife gave birth to a kid while we lived here. So the kid is now a citizen, but we never got citizenship. Doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter if I don't have an SSN, doesn't matter as a parent. It's really all about the student and their eligibility. The next question asks about the parent's education status. This is not used to determine financial aid, but it's really more about tracking. And again, there are some programs that are available at state level or institution level for first generation students. So that's why this question's here. Please make sure to answer it. The next question asks about whether your parent was killed in the line of duty, either serving the U.S. Armed Forces or as a public service officer. The reason that's important is because if you say yes, you need to provide some documentation for the school, but then there are certain benefits that will accrue to you with the Pell Grant that will accrue if you indeed have a yes answer to that question. You're then asked as a student about what your high school completion status will be. And it's very important the student has to have completed high school to be able to qualify for federal financial aid, but that could be a high school diploma or a GED or homeschool as an option. If it was a high school diploma, the student will be asked to search and name what high school they attended. And you can see there's a search box, the name of the high school they attended, and then they'll be asked to confirm that high school. So now we move on to the student finances section. And I know you're probably looking at the clock and thinking it's 6:53. He promised me we're going to get through this by 7:15. We will, because the rest of this information actually moves very quickly. So for finances, you might think, oh my gosh, I've got to write in all my tax information. I've got to enter all this in. No, it's actually very simple. There are really only three questions for your financials and then some information about assets. And I'm going to talk through these questions. And remember, these questions will show up twice, once for the student and once for the parent. So I'm going to talk about them now, and we don't have to discuss them again when we see the parent page because it'll be the same information. The first one says pension rollover. Now, most students don't have a pension. So most students are going to answer this as a zero. But remember, this form is also used by an older student who might be going back to college as well. And it might happen for parents. So if a parent took a distribution from their pension because they were moving it from one pension plan to another, that amount that they rolled over will show up as income on their tax return, on their 2022 tax return. And again, because for FAFSA for 24-25, we're looking at 2022 income, it's a prior year. That's the year we're going to focus on. So if the parent or student had a rollover, we don't want to include that income because it's not real income. It just moved from one account to another account. So in that situation, they would put the amount of the rollover here so that it would not get added in as an income source. Number two, it's also very unlikely that a student would have college grants or scholarships or AmeriCorps benefits that are reported as income to the IRS. To have to, and I'm not an accountant to be fair, but to have to report a scholarship as taxable, it would have to be more than the amount of tuition, fees, and other miscellaneous charges. So if the student reported some amount of their scholarship as income, they would take that amount off here. But again, that is probably very unlikely for most students and frankly for most parents as well. The third category here is what's called foreign earned income exclusion. And I just want to explain what this means. So, if you are a citizen or not living abroad, and when you file your taxes, you have earned income from abroad. So, let's say I'm filing in my US tax return, but I live in South Korea and I still file a US tax return because I do earn some income in the US, but I also earn the majority of my income in South Korea. And as a result, right, I pay taxes in South Korea. The US government says, well, you pay those taxes abroad. You don't have to pay us taxes as well. So as a result, I can subtract the amount of money that I earned in South Korea from my US tax return. That's called foreign earned income exclusion, FEIE. But that amount was legitimately income I earned. So when it comes time to analyze for financial aid, we've got to add it back in. So this is where you would put how much was that foreign earned income exclusion. Again, most families are not going to have this because most families don't live abroad earning wage. But if they do, that is what that field is for. We then go to assets. So again, just to make sure that we're clear about what assets are, there are on the FAFSA, we ask about liquid assets, cash, savings, and checking accounts. We ask about, and most students won't have, a business or investment farm. This is the asset in either your business, if you own a business, or if you own a farm that is an investment. It's whatever you could sell the assets in that business or investment farm for. Most students are not going to have this. Most parents won't have this, but it is required to be provided. And the last one here asks about investments, including real estate. And that would include things like stocks and bonds, um, other property, or other investments. Note, by the way, this does not include your primary residence. So, what most families have in assets, their two largest assets, are their home. We never ask about the home on the FAFSA, or your retirement. We never ask about your retirement on the FAFSA. So under investments, you're not going to put in your 401k or 403b or other retirement plans. Where you're going to put in is other investments other than retirement. So if you have a money market account or you have a stock fund that is not a retirement account, you will put it there. So we're almost done on the student side. All that's left is to select the colleges the student wants to apply to and sign and date the form. And so the next section asks the student to look for the colleges, and they can list up to 20 colleges on this application all at once. They can list all 20 of them. And another common mistake that students make is to wait until they're admitted before they, or in fact, until they've applied for admission before they list a college. You can list a college on the form even if you haven't applied yet. And in fact, it's not a bad idea to list any college you might apply to just so they get the FAFSA information. So again, that is the best approach. And you can look by the school name and state, or you can type in a school code. Every college has a 6-digit code that they can give you if that is easier to find the college. And once you find the college, you can click select, and that adds the college to the FAFSA. So you're not done as a student, and this is where a lot of students make a mistake. You have to review the information provided and confirm. And it says, a reminder, we've already invited your mom, Elise Alcina Tran, to complete her section of the application. Really important, the last piece is the signature. A lot of students forget this part. You have to go all the way through to the signature. So the very last section of the form, you will go through, confirm, and say, yes, I am signing it, and click the sign button. And that actually does complete the student section of the application. The student will be told, hey, you're almost there, but I'm still waiting for your parents' information to get their information complete. What happens next, and we'll go through this again very quickly, because the parent section is very much like the student section. The parent will get an email that says, hey, you've been invited to help complete the form for your student. And then you can see a copy of what that email looks like. You can simply click on Get Started as a parent, and that will take you right to your sign-in page. If not, you can click on, or you can go to studentaid.gov and you can actually search from there as a parent and sign in. So Raya's mom is going to be the one who answers this question. Now, again, here is the answer, and this is important. Does Raya's mom alone have to do it, or is it Raya's mom and Raya's dad? Right? How do we determine if it's one parent contributor or two parent contributors? What's important is it's all based on your tax filing status. So for the parents who are married, right? If mom and dad are married and they filed married filing jointly in 2022, only one of them has to be a contributor because there's only one tax record at the IRS that we've got to pull information on. If both parents filed separately, or one parent filed a tax return and one didn't, or neither parent filed a tax return, then each one of them is going to have to be a contributor because the point is they need to go to the IRS webpage, the system does, and confirm if they can find a match for that information. So again, married filing jointly, only one parent has to be a contributor. If they filed separately, or one was a head of household and one was single, or they both didn't file, or one didn't file, then in that situation, each parent is separately going to have to be a contributor. And we're going to walk that through again as we look at the form. So you can see here, again, as I said, much of this is going to look very familiar to you because we just went through it. So Alcina is given a login page. If she doesn't have an FSA ID, she can create one as well. It says, Raya has asked for your help in the form. Please accept the invitation. It tells you what that means to accept it, and it gives you some basic information about why and what it means to complete your form. And then you're going to see, again, the same 4 videos we saw before. And again, much of this is going to look very familiar. A confirmation of identity. And again, we're going to continue. Ability to provide consent, so request to provide consent. And Raya's mom is going to say, yes, I approve that. And now we jump to parent demographics. So I want to highlight for you, Raya's form had 5 sections. Raya's mom only has 3 sections, and it's pretty quick. So the first one is parent marital status. So Raya's mom is married. So again, if she were remarried or separated or divorced or widowed, she would indicate that. But in Raya's case, her mom is married. As I said before, state of legal residence comes up. Again, you want to use the older date for the 2 parents who has the longer period of residence. And that's it. That's all that's required for demographics. We're moving on to the finances section. The very first question asks, do you receive either in 22 or 23 benefits from any of the following federal programs? The Earned Income Tax Credit, the free or reduced price lunch, Medicaid, SNAP, CHIP, any of these programs. If you do, there are certain benefits that accrue to you as part of the application process. So you want to check that off. But most parents, or many parents, are going to click none of the above. But if any of this is true, then they want to check the box that is true and click continue. The next 2 questions are really designed to see if Raya's parents have changed, or Raya's tax information has changed, and if we're going to need to have both parents do and be a contributor. So number 1 asks, did or will the parent file a 2022 IRS form 1040 or 1040 NR? Did they file a return? Raya's mom says yes. If she were a non-tax filer, she would say no. The next question goes to that married filing jointly piece I brought up before. Did or will the parent file a 2022 joint tax return with their current spouse? Yes or no? If yes, then we know all we need is one parent to fill out information. If the answer were no, then we know that there'll be 2 parents who will serve as a contributor. This also gets at the possibility that if a parent is widowed, right, it may be the condition that the other parent has passed away since filing the 2022 form, or there may be a divorce or separation since filing the 2022 form. And there'll be subsequent questions that will get to that, but only if you answer no on this question. Family size. So family size will be automatically transferred over from the IRS form. So basically, it'll look at the number of exemptions and say, Based on those number of exemptions, we're going to assume that your family size is this number. If that number or assumption is wrong, this is an opportunity for the family to correct that. So let me give you an example of where that might be the case. So let's say Raya's mom got pregnant in 2022 and had a baby in 2023. So on the tax return in 2022, all we had was Raya, mom, and dad. But now there's a new sibling. So in that situation, Raya's mom's going to indicate, no, there's one more child. So we now are a family of four, not a family of three. But in most cases, probably your family's not going to have a change in the number in family since they filed the tax return in 2022. But if they did, this is how you would update that. The next question asks, how many in your family are going to be going to college next year? That is not anything that matters on the financial aid formula, but it's there as a point of information for colleges and universities and for state scholarship providers. And now here is the financial questions. And again, we talked about rollovers, we talked about college grants, we talked about foreign income exclusion. The only thing we haven't talked about is this earned income credit. So if a family or a parent receives the earned income credit, they would identify that here. This is a credit that's provided primarily for families with children, and it's a credit against your tax liability that can be refunded. If you have this benefit, you would know that. It's filed on your tax return. If not, you can check the tax return. If you click the little I box, it will tell you where on the tax return to look. But probably most families have no or don't know as a response. And then we get to assets. Again, the assets are the same as we've seen before. There is one new question here, which is annual child support received. So if you, as a parent, received child support in the last calendar year, so right now the last calendar year is 2023, right? The last complete calendar year. If you received child support in that year, you would write the amount of child support you received. It's not treated as income, it's treated as an asset in the financial aid formula, but you put that information here, and that would be an important disclosure. But again, for many families, they may not have received child support. But if they did, it's not how much they were owed, it's how much they actually received in the last calendar year that would be reported there. Finally, the parent is asked to provide information about the other parent, just in case that other parent needs to be a contributor. But in this case, they don't need to be because we have all the information we need. So the parent is asked to review their section, much like before. With the student, the parent has to sign their section, click that they authorize, they agree, and they sign and submit. Once they do that, the FAFSA form is actually submitted, and Raya will get an email saying, congratulations, your form is completed. And that email is very important because that's what you're going to want as proof of the fact that the FAFSA has been done. So what I want to do there's a question I want to answer that was asked. So it says the FAFSA does recognize the ITIN number because I thought they were only asked to enter a valid SSN or indicate you don't have one. So the answer to that question, again, remember, students need to have an SSN to be able to complete, or a social security number to be able to complete the FAFSA. But for parents who are not US citizens, if they have an ITIN, and the student clicks, my parent does not have an SSN, the very next question that will be asked is, does your parent have an ITIN? And please enter the ITIN number here. So the choices are SSN, that if they have one, they have to disclose it for parents. ITIN as the second choice. If they have neither of those, then they will go through an attempt to match identity using information from TransUnion or one of the other credit bureau providers. If they can't do that, they'll be allowed to submit the form, but will be asked to submit documentation to prove their identity. So again, just to make sure that that is how that process works. Okay, so what I want to do as we come to sort of the end of this, and we will certainly give you lots of time for questions and answers, I want to show you the form that you're going to submit to provide documentation that you have completed the 10 applications. And I'm going to give you as well the link to the form, which I've provided in the webinar chat. So this is the form that you will complete. You'll type in your name, your email address, your mailing address, so we know where to send your check, your phone number, the organization or school you work for or represent, and you'll click on Add File. When you click on Add File, you will be asked to upload to here a copy of the PDF or images of the 10 completion records for FAFSA for your students. So a reminder, once your student does a FAFSA, they will be sent an email that gives information that says, congratulations, your FAFSA is complete. It is a copy of that email, a screenshot, a PDF of that confirmation email that we're looking for to help confirm that you've got 10 students who have done their FAFSA. And you can see as long as the submission date was on or after June 20th, we will accept that as documentation. Now, this program that we're offering runs through August 15th. So you need to get your forms submitted using this website by August 15th. The FAFSA runs all year, but the reason we have to end on August 15th is because the funding for this program that's provided by the federal government expires by the end of August. And we need to make sure we have time to turn around and write that check to you. So again, please make sure that you get that information done by August 15th. So I want to answer again a couple of questions that are in the chat. Monica's typing an answer to one right now, but it says, how long does it take a parent to receive an invitation from their child to complete their portion of the application? It is instant. As soon as the student enters the parent's information and clicks the next screen, that invitation is immediately sent to the parent. So often what will happen is you can have a parent and student sitting side by side, and they can together, right, do their section. Student will do their section, they'll click submit or hit the next screen, and immediately the parent will get that email and they can start working on their section. Thank you, Colleen, for clarifying. It is August 15th of 2024, next month, is when our program runs out. FAFSA goes all year, but up through next June 30th. But to participate in this benefit program that we're offering tonight, we need to get you to submit that proof no later than August 15th of 2024, so we can make sure to get you your payment. Okay, so let's see. There are a couple of questions that are out there. Um, can you share a guide to use for FAFSA ID? So the FSA ID or FAFSA ID, if you go online to the studentaid.gov webpage, it will walk through information about how to access it. So let me show you that very quickly. Let's go to studentaid.gov. So here is FAFSA form, and you can see complete the FAFSA form. But here under create account is where students can actually go through and parents can go through and create their account. So again, this will walk them through the get started, and then we'll talk through all the individual questions that you need to answer. So it's pretty easy. It's basically personal information, account information, contact, some challenge questions, etc. So that will go through point by point how to complete that part of the application. So that's piece number one. The second piece I wanted to show you, and we talked a little bit about this, is if you go to FAFSA Advisor, or actually, sorry, it's FAFSAadvising.com. That will take you to the page that is advertising and provides you information about tonight's event. At the bottom of the page, you will see a link to the PowerPoint that we have provided this evening. So if you click on that link, that will take you to a website that has the PDF version as well as the PowerPoint. So again, if you click on the PowerPoint or the PDF, that will open up the 312 pages for you. So again, that is at FAFSAadvising.com. And then from there, on the bottom of the page, there's a link to the PDF and to the PowerPoint that you can get. This is the copy of the one that we used tonight. And it will again give you screenshots of the entire process from start to end. I do want to identify one more thing for you. So let me just show you one other piece, and then we will break for those of you who need to head out. And that is, I want to show you what the student has access to, which is something called the FAFSA submission summary. So once the application is complete, the student will be told they can log in and view their FAFSA submission summary. That basically repeats all the information they've provided and provides a chance to make corrections or changes if they need to. So you can see that Raya, her application was received September 10th. It was processed on September 12th. And this data release number is important if she wants to provide that to a college to retrieve her FAFSA. You can also see we have estimated aid. It tells her if she qualifies for a Pell Grant or direct loans or work study. It tells her student aid index number. That's very important because this is the number that we will use as the college to determine how much federal aid the student might be eligible for. It also repeats all of her answers, and you can see this link here that says make a correction. If the student clicks on make a correction, it gives the student the opportunity to actually go through and correct any information that might have been an error on the FAFSA, and also allows the student to add or remove colleges as necessary if she needs to. And also, let's keep on paging through. It gives information on the various schools that Raya applied to, their graduation rate, their retention rate, their transfer rate, what the average debt is among graduation, and what their average annual cost is. So again, this is good information as Raya is planning on her admission and what to do next. And it gives her some information about next steps and more resources. Again, wanted to share that with you more because I wanted to make sure that you saw the information that was available to Raya as part of the application. And that information will be shared with her. So, with that, again, I want to encourage you um, to really work with, and I'm gonna clarify to with the question that Carolina has raised. What we're looking for is not people to help with next academic year cycle, not the 25-26 cycle. We're still trying to make a difference for this year, for 24-25 college attendance. So we're looking for people who might be going to college in a month or so, who need help getting their application done. That's the population we're really focused on. That's the population we're trying to assist. And that's the population we're asking you to help us identify and partner with, because that's the population that's had the most struggle with this year's application process. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and attention and partnership with this. Please feel free after tonight, if you have questions, to email me at dbarkowitz@gmail.com, and I will put that in the chat. Or feel free to reach out to FAFSAeducate@gmail.com. That is also available as a contact. We will, as I've said, we will in the next day or so send you a copy of the recording of tonight's presentation, as well as links to some pieces or portion, so you had that information. So with that, why don't we go ahead and stop the recording, Tron, if you